Hi, class. We're picking up the conversation with really moving along with the text, and the next conversation is really, it sounds like it should be a simple one. We're talking about cultural variance, and it's something that everyone has mentioned since the beginning. We all understand a very obvious truth. We're going to start with a very obvious truth that different people are different. Now, it takes a whole bunch of people with a PhD in psychology to be in the same room and say that that is a remarkable statement. Different people are different. The average person on the street knows that without having to study it for their entire life. But psychologists, we study that for a long period of time. There's lots of different theories that have tried to understand how we are all the same. We got the same anatomy, maybe all the same needs as a human being, maybe all the same, maybe we're not all that different. A lot of theories have really focused in on that. Cultural variance is simply stating that there is a variable in the experiment, that we all are different because we're different, right? There are different cultures, there are different whatevers. Really, the effort shouldn't be in just acknowledging or verifying that super obvious truth, but how and why, right? And that's what psychology is trying to study, particularly with personalities. How and why are cultures different? And really, in regard to differentness, if we're going to focus in on how we are different, there's way too many variables. The list of variables could go on for seemingly an infinite number of times, right? Especially if you take a phenomenological perspective in which everyone's experience is unique anyway. There would be an infinite number of ways in which we're different. So a lot easier for psychologists than trying to figure out how we are different, right? Different people are different, but how, right? Maybe if we can find some common ground, if we can find some way in which we are similar, then maybe that'll create less variables for these other aspects. And that's really what starts the conversation of universal values. And universal values is not new to at least the 20th century, 21st century at studying personality types. I think you can make a pretty good argument that that's been around, at least symbolically, through the Ten Commandments. So a lot of people have made the argument that the Ten Commandments are part of trying to understand our universality, the universal value system, and especially if you eliminate the ones that are focused in on placing God as first, you get values of rest, respect. You get do not murder, do not commit adultery, do not steal, do not lie, and do not envy, right? That you have this list of this hierarchy of values that these are at the top, okay? Don't kill people, take time to rest, don't steal, don't envy, don't sleep with your neighbor's wife. Some basic things that we would pretty much all agree to that seem fairly self-explanatory, but yet the Ten Commandments are not very well followed in the world. It's also a conversation that Aristotle picked up. Thomas Aquinas picked up as well, obviously a lot later. But this conversation of natural law. And the theory of natural law is that law is rational. It's derived from our rationality, the rationality of nature itself. And so law and values, the order of things is objective and universal. Right? If natural law comes from natural rationality, then we all have it. And so that truth is objective and universal. So that's been argued for a very long period of time. But really modern psychologists have this list that they've created, this pinwheel of values, and really breaking it down to four main categories. And the first two would be openness to change and self-enhancement. And they share a lot of subcategories under that. So openness to change and self-enhancement, and underneath that would be self-direction, the ability to be creative and engage in your freedom. stimulation, and really it's all about excitement. Hedonism, which is about pleasure. Achievement, which is about excess and ambition, that we value those things. And power, and that really does mean authority and wealth. That those subcategories describe our pursuit, our value of self-enhancement and openness to change. And then the third value would be self-transcendence, which is a value of universalism, which really addresses social justice, equality. Also, another subcategory in that is benevolence. We value helpfulness, generally speaking. The fourth value would be conservation, which is labeled more as security. Security in a much broader sense. Security as in regards to social order, maintaining that social order, as well as conformity or tradition, right? And having we value obedience to tradition or humility, and it takes humility to conform, really. So those would be the four that modern psychologists have come up with, and obviously with a long list of subcategories underneath it. That when they're trying to establish a list of universal values that are cross-cultural, this is the list that they've come up with so far. And I think there's a lot of argument against it. This is by no means set in stone. This is not highly agreed upon. There's plenty of other theorists out there that have given a list as well. You might even say that the 5-factor model is in some ways agreeing to some of this, but also in ways challenging it with their own list of 5 instead of 4. But really today, big difference between cultures. If we're going to talk about cultural variance, we have to talk about the foundational differences, these fundamental differences between cultures. And every culture is unique in all of its ways, for all of its history and experiences, and there's a lot of different reasons why cultures are different. But fundamentally, it tends to come down to a battle between individualism and collectivism. This is a huge conversation. This really separates cultures, and very few people sit down to really understand collectivism and individualism. It typically is talked about as an East versus West conversation, that the Eastern cultures are far more collectivist, and the Western civilization is built on individualism, and with obviously the United States being listed as number 1 in individualism. I think that misses a proper understanding of what that really means. I don't think it's that cut and dry, East versus West. And I don't want to fall into reductio ad absurdum and just looking at an inaccurate portrayal of individualism or collectivism, because really an insulting way to go about understanding collectivism is to say that no one has an opinion, and you're not supposed to stand out at all, and it's just you are part of a mob or the masses, part of the masses, and the individual doesn't matter at all. And there may be examples in which that really reductionistic perspective holds true. We probably could point to some examples in history, maybe even some current examples if we made the argument long enough. But really that's a misunderstanding of collectivism and what collectivism really is. And collectivism is understanding that the group matters, right? That life is lived in a group, that we can only survive in a group. The tribe must stick together, and that's how we survive, that's how we stay safe. And you really see that argument play out in something as simple as The Walking Dead. And you think at the end of the world, zombie apocalypse, that they would all just run their different directions. Why would you put up with this annoying character or this dangerous character. Why would you do that? And it's really a sense of collectivism, that we have to stick together in order to survive. It's a basic idea. And in a lot of Asian cultures, that's obviously not to that extreme, but that's very much practiced, in that I can't make this decision by myself, not because I'm incapable. Again, let's not go the reductionistic route. It's not that I'm incapable of making this decision by myself, but the opinions of my family matter. The opinions of my clan matter, right? The village opinion matters, and there's wisdom in collecting a wide variety of opinions, and the opinion that we all come to an agreement on, right? The decision, not your decision or my decision or his decision, but the decision that we have when we come together and we negotiate it through, that is a healthy decision. And collectivists look at the whole. They want to look at the grouping, and that's really important, right? And that's you see that a lot with social work today. You see that a lot with anthropology. You see that a lot in any kind of systems work, right? In any organization that looks at the systems is practicing collectivism, right? Where, how do I address this population? They're not engaging in the individual dialogue with the man on the street. They're engaging the neighborhood in its entirety. And when you see big problems in big neighborhoods, you address that entire neighborhood with that solution. And there's some obvious problems to doing that, but they're also not entirely wrong. The danger of being completely individualistic is, well, falling into that reductionistic understanding, and that you fall into selfishness. You fall into lack of compassion or care for your fellow neighbor. You don't know who your neighbor is, and that's not what individualism is all about. But the danger is that you become narcissistic, you become arrogant, and you make haughty decisions and don't seek counsel. You lose the ability to negotiate, and really you lose the ability to conversate, more importantly, to actually have a conversation with somebody. You really lose that. You can lose that with individualism when you take individualism too far. The danger of collectivism is that the individual is lost entirely. And you see that in some extreme examples. You see that in order for Beijing to survive, Mao was willing to have 60 million people starve to death. Because, well, what are 60 million compared to the population of China? So, focusing in on collectivism has its benefits. It has its, it definitely has its advantages. There's a lot of wisdom in that collectivism. But there's obviously the danger of losing the individual. And individualism is really a pretty radical idea. And true individualism, again, not the egotistical, not the narcissistic, not the arrogant. And I think we have to separate out a few different terms. Hopefully you've come across good definitions of nationalism. Nationalism is having that extreme pride for your nation with disregard for international opinion. That's not the same as being an individual, because obviously you can still be collectivistic within that nation. You just aren't taking international opinion into account. And almost every nation practices that to some extent. Some more than others. But you can also confuse this with isolationism, which the US, at least pre-World War II, was really known for its isolationism, not wanting to get involved in the problems of other nations. And that's not what individualism is all about, right? Being a hermit and staying inside your room, whether it's right to interfere in other people's problems or not is a different conversation. But being a hermit and isolating yourself is not the same as being an individual. You also could just be provocative for the sake of being provocative, right? That rebel without a cause. You're just pushing against the grain. Not only are you going against the grain, but you want to interrupt the flow of the river as much as possible, right? The whole river is flowing this way, and you're just trying to mess it up as much as possible. That's not being an individual, that's being a rebel. A rebel is intentionally trying to disrupt things, trying to disrupt the masses, which in a way, he's still responding to the masses. He's still part of that mob mentality. He's just rebelling against it. He's still sucked up into that thought process. An individual simply understands that they have an independence from that mob mentality, that they can, as Jung did, step out of that fog and realize that I exist. It's, yes, the opinion of the group matters. Yes, there is an opinion of the group, and yes, there are other people in the world, but I exist as well. And it's what's revolutionary about that idea is, one, that it's very rare historically. That's what makes the U.S. Constitution actually so revolutionary. And a lot of people lose this. You definitely don't learn it in history class. But you really sit back and you read the Constitution. We the people. We the people. For one, the people never mattered historically, right? For king and country, not for the people. The people have never really been considered historically. But we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men were created equal, that we are all individuals, and very first rule, okay, freedom of speech. That's revolutionary. And still to this day is revolutionary. The U.S. is the only country in the world that has freedom of speech, and it gets challenged every single day. Or at least constitutionally has the protection of freedom of speech. And again, it is challenged every single day. It's very unique, very revolutionary thought. Because in order to have freedom of speech, you have to be an individual capable of speaking, or at least speaking something worth listening to, right? And really historically, and for most people in the world, the individual doesn't have anything to say. That there is the voice of the mob, there is the agreed upon assumptions of the masses, and when you get all those minds together, that is the voice that matters. And the U.S. Constitution says, no, everyone's voice is supposed to matter. Everyone's voice does matter, and that is self-evident, which is, again, it's a remarkable statement, because it's self-evident to the founders, but not to anyone else in the world, at least at the time. This is a very unique thought. And still to this day, the idea that you are an individual whose voice matters, whose decisions matter, whose integrity, your individual integrity matters. Again, that's even more rare, right? The more we push this idea that the individual exists and matters, this becomes extremely, extremely rare. Even to the point where guards after World War II, Nazi guards, were coming up, and their defense was, I was just following orders. And how many times, right? That was really the kind of the first time that was public. That defense was publicly displayed to the entire world. How do you explain your actions? I was just following orders. And since then, the history has continued, and unfortunately hasn't really changed all that much. Genocide after genocide after genocide. The idea that we will never forget, or never again, as is written in the Holocaust Museum, never again is, I hate to say a joke because it's not funny, but time and time and time again it has happened. And what we've heard as the constant defense is, I was just following orders. Now, psychologically, we understand why. We understand how easy it is to just start following orders. And our tendency towards conformity, our tendency is towards collectivism, right? And I think you can really see that right now. This is one unfortunate but giant psychological experiment that I think very few people are paying very much attention to. For instance, toilet paper. We saw some people buying toilet paper, a lot of toilet paper. There's a handful of people, I'm sure, that've got like a 5-year supply of toilet paper in their closet, and for some reasons it makes sense, right? That there's this evolutionary theory that we hate anything that disgusts us. So obviously toilet paper helps us avoid that disgust. But also, what I think makes more sense, and I've heard other people repeat my theory as well, is that how do you bulk up as much as possible for as little as possible? Toilet paper from Costco takes up a lot of room. And honestly, like, for the longest time, we had one car, it was a small hatchback. If we bought toilet paper at Costco, we had to make sure we weren't buying too much else, because it just took up too much space in our car. And so when you go and you feel panicked and you feel unprepared, how do you buy as much stuff as possible, or at least as much volume of stuff? Costco toilet paper takes up a lot of room in your car or a lot of room in your house, and you have stacks of Costco toilet paper, and you only spent a few $100s for several cases of it. And no, it's a false sense of security, and toilet paper is not going to help you with the coronavirus. But it made you feel like you were more prepared. But now, okay, so that's the panic response. What about the second person, right? What about that person who saw you buying a large amount of toilet paper? Now, see, that person, now he doesn't feel prepared, because he doesn't have 10 cases of toilet paper from Costco. His cart is full of like normal things, chicken or something. He's got normal things in it. He's got like an extra bag of salad. So he must be unprepared, because you must know something that he doesn't. So he follows suit, and he just picks it all up and he starts buying toilet paper. Well, then you have the third wave of people who now see that there's very little toilet paper out there, and if I want toilet paper, I might need to buy toilet paper, because Group A freaked out, Group B followed Group A's freak out, so Group C has to buy toilet paper because there is no more toilet paper. Right? It's collectivism. It's that mob mentality. It's, I'm doing this because the masses are doing this. And if we would all honestly just stop and take a deep breath and just breathe and realize I do not need 5-year supply of toilet paper, that really I don't need a whole lot of toilet paper to get me through a while, we'd all, well, one, be thinking like individuals, and two, probably be a little bit better off right now. But that step back and to take a deep breath, that's stepping away from that mob mentality. Step out of the herd for just a minute, right? We're in the herd and we're stuck and we lose our perspective, and so we're buying toilet paper in droves. But if we can just step out of that for a minute and take a deep breath, we're stepping into the individual, out of the herd and out of the collective and into an individual, our individual self. And again, understanding that phenomenologically, that we each have this different experience, this different perspective, and we bring something unique to the table. That's a conversation of the individual. And that's really lost in modern society. It's very, very rare for people to want to do that. It's very rare for people to put themselves out on a limb, to have a unique idea, to validate their unique idea, or at least say their unique idea. At least to say their unique idea out loud. And there's a Japanese proverb that says the nail that sticks out is the nail that gets smashed, right? Which makes sense. It's the one that's not hammered, so that's the one that's going to get hit. So don't stick out. Don't be unique. Be a part of the collective. Blend in. And the zebra who's the pink zebra, if there was one, the pink zebra is going to be the first one to be eaten. That's why there are no pink zebras. That's why they all look the same, right? You get a herd together, And yes, every zebra is unique in their stripes. It's almost like their thumbprint. But when you get them together, they all look the same. It all looks like one giant blob. Fish as well. Elephants herd together, and the one that stands out on its own is the one that gets picked off. You do not want to be the one that stands out. But thankfully, we're not animals, right? Man is more. And if we can step out and understand our individuality, if we can step into that individuation, the process of becoming a unique individual, we can all breathe just a little bit. The danger, again, is that as you step into that phenomenological experience, as you step into that individuation, you lose complete hold of the collective at all. You just shove that way off screen as if it doesn't exist at all. And then you can create narcissism or just straight up arrogance, and that always leads to a fall. It always leads to a crash when we stop considering that we also belong to a group. There must be a little bit of this, a little bit of that. But understanding what it's like to exist as an individual who considers the collective, individual who exists, who coexists with the collective, would be important rather than just choosing Camp A or Camp B. But, we really see this in a lot of different places. And again, back to the freedom of speech conversation. That's something that's really been missed in our at least our political discussions. It's not that there are some people who just don't value speech. It's not that we don't value what other people have to say. It's not just that I disagree with you, therefore I want to silence you. If I'm a collectivist, you do not have anything worth saying. The individual has nothing to offer. In fact, all you're doing is disrupting the cohesion of the masses. That's all you're doing, is disrupting it with your freedom of speech. Therefore, I want to shut down your speech to preserve the calm and the cohesion of the masses. And the more we can have that globalism, right, or have that universality, the safer we'll be, according to a collectivist. The problem with obviously what collectivists aren't understanding, the problem is that it's not just that I want to be able to say whatever I wanted to say, whether it offends you or not. That's not freedom of speech. That's just kind of being a jerk. That's again just being arrogant or narcissistic. But freedom of speech is about recognizing the individual and that the individual voice matters and has value. And again, this is not well understood and not well debated. But you can see multiple cultures within the US that are definitely battling this through. Varying cultures without Europe that are battling this through. Varying cultures around the entire world that are battling this through, this individual or collectivist mentality. And a lot of the different value structures, the different personality types that are going to come out of a collectivist or an individualistic culture, I mean, it will range drastically. But I think you'll find that a lot of the foundation will go back to that conversation of this versus that, individual versus collective. And I think that's been argued by psychologists and philosophers for a couple hundred years, definitely at least the last 100 years. Jung really leading that conversation again with Rumi, the lecture that I gave on Jung and individuation, the concept of stepping into that, stepping out of the fog, stepping into the value of your existence, and really recognizing all that you as an individual are capable of, and then taking responsibility for it, right? I mean, that's Frankel's response as these guards are coming up, and if he says if everything is deterministic, if everything is just built on genetics, if everything is just built on being shaped by the environment, right, as Skinner would say, then the defense that these guards gave at Auschwitz is fine. They were just following orders. They were just conditioned. It was just the temperature of the times. But no, by no means. Of course they're responsible. We're all responsible for our choices. We all have that freedom of choice. The individual exists. And so that individuation, or the individualism versus collectivism, really is going to start telling the difference between why different people are different. Again, a super obvious truth, but why? What really makes them different? What's driving that difference? And even amongst your friends, right, or amongst your classmates, amongst your family, start looking deeper. Start seeing what's driving the conversation, what's driving their personality, what's driving their perspective. And if you're asking that question, how are they acting out as an individual? Are they practicing that individuation, or are they trying to secure that collective? Right? Are they moving into that collectivism? Are they trying to preserve the family and the family name and really bring the family together? Because one rule in our family is that we stick together. Right? And number one rule, we stick together. Second rule, we obey. Right? Second rule, a lot of different things, right? First time obedience, or happy hearts, and all these different things we're teaching our kids. But we need to stick together. And if we can stick together for one, we're probably going to be okay. If I turn around and my kid's sprinting the other direction at the zoo, we're not okay, right? And first time obedience is out the window because he can't even hear me. He's gone. And I can't keep him safe if we don't stick together, right? So there might be this collectivism mentality where we need to stick together in order to stay safe. Again, the tribe that sticks together survives. Or maybe you're noticing the behaviors and they're acting out the freedom of their individual self. And they're trying to not just have self-expression, because that's a cheap form of being an individual, but they're validating the uniqueness of their life. And that may be guiding their behaviors, that may be guiding their perspectives or the advice that they're giving you. But again, being able to understand that different people are different. There is cultural variance, and despite our drive for establishing universality between all cultures, I'm not sure we're going to really get there. I think we'll always find outliers. Really understanding what's driving the cultural variance is far more of a productive conversation, or at least much better in creating some solidarity between us, being able to understand each other better and connect. So anyways, thank you, and hope you guys stay safe and have a great Easter, and we will continue with our lectures next week. Thanks.